A new study has been released calling for greater accessibility across Canada for people with disabilities. The Angus Reid Institute, in partnership with the Rick Hansen Foundation, found that 1 in 5 Canadians, that's almost 9 million people, will live with a disability by the year 2030. The study also says that 92% of Canadians believe accessibility is a human right. Rick Hansen, the man in motion himself, joins me now from our downtown studio. Rick, good to see you. Long time no talk to you.
Yeah, you too, Jennifer.
Yeah, so listen, explain to us what the accessibility gap is for Canadians and people with disabilities. What does that mean?
Well, what it means, first of all, is that, over 92% of Canadians polled really believe that, it's a human right to include people with disabilities. It's not just a privilege. And that's a big step forward. But the gap is the expectations versus reality. And they really also identify that they see, that accessibility in the built environment, the places and spaces we live, work, and play, still have a long way to go, as does employment and, of course, transportation.
Right, and so while we all want to say the right things, following through and building the right things, building the proper type of structures for people with disabilities to access is still, as you say, there's a long way to go. Sure,
and of course the research into Canadian opinions also brings some interesting and challenging insights, which is that they also believe that it's actually difficult and acceptable to think that we can't go all the way because of costs. And of course, when we have a country that's built on a constitution that says that we are an accessible and inclusive country, we have to recognize that maybe some of those myths about costs are far outweighed by more common sense, affordable solutions, but also probably the return on investment exponentially on the economic dividends when you actually return people, to work or have them be a productive part of society or build economies off products and services for people with disabilities.
Sure. So what I'm hearing you say is that there's really a misperception that it actually costs more to build structures that make them more accessible.
Yeah, and at the basic level, of course, from a human rights point of view, cost really shouldn't be on the table. It's
right.
Something we need to do, but also beyond that, there's much more we can do to become much more inclusive, because it's an economic imperative, especially with the aging baby boomers and that trend moving to 1 in 5 by 2030. Canada's not prepared, and it's up to our political and economic leaders to start to turn the table and see this as an opportunity to go beyond compliance to basic rights legislation.
Yeah, you've been floating this idea and talking about an idea of inspiring architects, builders, construction people to design things with that goal in mind, and to even have awards for people who design special buildings that make them accessible for people with disabilities.
Yeah, and we have to look at other sectors that have really taken issues and really broken through with awareness, but also practical solutions. And in the environment area, with energy efficient buildings, LEED's model of accreditation and certification has taken the general issue of the conversation, professionalized it with universal standards of approach. And then, of course, these professionals have gone out and assessed buildings, especially in the early design stages, so that they're actually, meeting the needs of people with disabilities, in the environment sense. So that LEEDs-like model could be used for people with disabilities, and that certification program will be a game changer, because, then, your bronze level will be the human rights compliance side, then silver, gold, and platinum will become innovation spaces for economic productivity and going to the next level.
Yeah, kind of like the Olympics of building structures,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, and of course then it would be globally relevant and portable, so this Canadian solution would take care of the complexities of various local interpretations of things like code, which are important, but it confuses multinational companies and of course people who are traveling around the world and ultimately wanting to just know what they're getting into and that they get the best accommodation and service possible.
Right. So we got about a minute left. I do want to put you on the spot, but I know you will rise to the occasion. Give me some examples of buildings that people might be familiar with that fall in line with, they're beautiful buildings, but they're wonderfully structured for both people, able-bodied people and people with disabilities. So I'm thinking here in Toronto, for example, the AGO, great example.
Yeah, well, there's a number of examples around, and not as familiar with all the specific ones in the Toronto area, but I can tell you that, for instance, the Ability Center that was built, down near Ajax was, an incredible facility, because it was built with that absolute accessibility in mind. And, and of course, the costs associated in the planning phase are basically marginal, but it's really a design mentality that has to be shifted. And so this notion of accreditation and certification will actually become a course that's mandatory for architects, designers, engineers, tradesfolks, and guess what? There'll be ability centers everywhere, and we won't have to deal with this issue before because it'll be normalized now.
Well, gosh, that was my last question. Don't you look forward to the day when you don't have to talk about this anymore, Rick?
Yeah, well, it'll be fantastic. That's the dream. That's what I started 30 years ago. But now we need to make it sustainable for next generation and get thousands of people doing it and then get there faster.
Rick Hansen in Toronto this week. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, take care. Meantime, Toronto's housing prices